Thank you, guys. Thank you, Larry, for inviting me. Thank you guys for allowing me to come talk to you guys tonight and talk to you guys about surf casting and what I specifically do. So my goal, like with this talk, is that I'm by no means an expert. The way I fish is not necessarily the right way to fish or the only way to fish, but this is how I fish, and this is what I find has been working for me. So take what I tell you with a grain of salt. It's definitely not the only way to do things, but again, this is what works for me. Everyone fishes differently, so I just wanted to kind of give you guys a window into how I approach surf casting and just kind of do a brain dump of my surf casting knowledge that I've acquired over the last few years for you guys. So without further ado, and actually for you guys that are saying that there's not a lot of big fish around, that fish right there on the right was caught on Saturday night. So that's pretty recent. So about me, I was born and raised right over in Ipswich. I grew up fishing Ipswich, Cranes, Plum Island, all over the North Shore. I started out fly fishing actually at a young age. My grandfather taught me how to fly fish for trout. The last 5 or 6 years or so, I've really been focusing on surf casting, specifically wetsuiting, after dark, specifically targeting big fish. Schoolies are fun, but when we go out in the middle of the night with a bucket full of eels, we're not going for schoolies, we're going for big fish. I target most of the sandy beaches around here. I don't do too much rock fishing, I don't go to the canal. I stick to the sandy beaches around here, mostly Ipswich, Plum Island. I would say I probably split my time 50-50 between Ipswich and Plum Island. I fish a lot. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I'm young, I don't have a family, I have very few commitments outside of work, so I'm out there 4 and 5 nights a week, sometimes more. 3 years ago I started Plum Island Surfcasting guide service. Saw kind of a need around here, not too many surf guides. It's been steadily increasing over the last few years. I also create original, you guys may have seen some of my videos or reports on Surfland's site. The last couple, or this past season, I also got an opportunity to be a contributing writer for the Fisherman New England edition and On the Water, so I have published articles now on surf casting. This year I also started working on a charter boat for Obsessed Charters out of Newbury, so that's also been an interesting perspective of kind of getting to see what's going on, not just from shore. I get to see what bait's doing a little further out front. I get to see, just a little bit more of the big picture out there. So that's been interesting. And I'm an avid catch and release proponent. 99.9% of my fish go right back where I caught them. I've kept 1 fish this year. People are complaining about, I'm not going to get into a talk about the striper population, but I'm a catch and release proponent. So tools of the trade. As most of you guys may know, I do most of my fishing in a wetsuit. I do use waders, and a lot of times if it's really hot, I'll just go in shorts and sandals, that's fine. But most of my fishing, I would say probably 70 to 80% of it is done in a wetsuit. I think wetsuits are really intimidating to people. Any of you guys here fish in a wetsuit? Okay, so a lot of guys think that wetsuit is like the extreme thing to get into. It can be. I mean, you can push wetsuiting as far as you want. You can be that guy that is swimming 100 yards out to a rock. What we really use the wetsuits around here for is we're fishing sandbars, we're fishing open beaches. we're trying to eliminate that risk of your waders getting filled up, really. It's not that we're swimming out to these sandbars. Yeah, there are nights that I come back through and it's neck deep. If I had waders on, I'd be in trouble. But in a wetsuit, it's no problem. I find a wetsuit to be way more comfortable to walk in. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to walk long distances in waders, but it's not fun. Wetsuit definitely allows you, I mean, I can walk all night in my wetsuit and not get chafed. As long as I got a nice pair of bicycle shorts on underneath, I'm good to go. You will definitely get chafed in waders. So again, the wetsuit is, it's more of a safety item. It's no more expensive than a pair of waders. A lot of guys are like, wow, wetsuit is expensive. I got mine for about 175 bucks. That's cheaper than most mid to high-end waders. What else? So that kind of covers the wetsuit. The other thing I bring with me, you can kind of see in that photo, is my surf belt. Holds all the essentials. I travel light when I go out. Well, I'm walking all night. We're moving around a lot, so you don't want to be bringing a ton of tackle with you. I try and tune it down to exactly what I need. So I got my pliers, I got my boga grip, usually a dive knife. On my surf belt, I usually have a couple D-rings. That's just for holding accessories, to hold my, to hold my boga, to hold those things. It allows everything to be right there for you. So if I'm out in the surf, last thing I want to do is go back to shore and grab something on the beach. So primarily the biggest thing with wetsuiting is you really need everything to be right there on you, because if you're out in the surf, that's where you're going to do most of your dealing, whether it's unhooking a fish, whether it's changing a plug, putting an eel on. We try and do all that without going back to shore if possible. Since most of my fishing is done at night, I always have a headlamp and a backup light with me. There's nothing worse than being a couple miles down the beach and having your headlamp go out and then your night's over. So I always carry a backup light. Both of them are waterproof. It also stinks to have your light go out in the middle of the night because you took a wave over your head or because it started pouring rain. My plug bag. I have a couple bags. This is my big bag. It's 4 tubes. This is, if I'm going plug fishing, what I'm bringing with me, because it's usually packed to the gills with plugs. But 4 tubes is all I need. Even a lot of nights this is overkill. I typically bring 3 or 4 main plugs with me. But where the numbers come in is I tend to pack a lot of different colors. So same plug, but just in a variety of different colors. One thing I've learned from experience with surf bags, cheap surf bags are just that. You get what you pay for. I've had plenty of nights where these bags, I won't say the brand name, but it starts with an A, and I had so many nights where I was just spending 15, 20 minutes at a time trying to get a plug pulled out of the fabric of my bag. Higher end bags like Gear Up, unfortunately I don't think Commando is in business anymore. Flatlander. Do yourself a favor and invest in a nice bag. You will thank yourself. It will stand up to the abuse of salt water. And your bag will get abused if you are out a bunch of nights every week in the salt water. As far as rods go, I typically use between 9 and 10 foot rods. This is a 9.6. This is a Century slingshot. I use this for everything from eeling to plugging. It's a great all-around rod. But anything in the 9 to 10 foot range is fine. If you're going to be doing a lot of eeling, you're probably going to want to go with something a little softer, a little slower action. If you're doing a lot of plugging, top water, a faster action rod is more maybe what you're gearing towards. As far as line goes, I use 30 to 40 pound braided line. I use a 40 pound fluorocarbon leader. about 2 to 3 feet long, and a tactical angler's clip, as well as a swivel on there as well. So, pretty straightforward. If you guys have any questions at any point, just stop me.
I don't use a swivel, I tie direct.
Yep.
So is there any particular knots that you use on your swivel?
Yeah, so when I'm connecting the braided line to the swivel, I tie a Palomar. And then from there, I just use cinch knots for my leader. So, and I've hardly ever had problems with knots popping. And as long as you tie them properly and check everything, I'm pretty obsessive about my knots. Sometimes I'll do it 3 or 4 times before I'm happy with it. So, yeah, Julia.
2 questions. What's your favorite color in a plug, and what's your favorite plug?
We'll get to both of those in a later slide.
All right,
so.
Cool.
So the wetsuit advantage, I kind of covered some of this, but again, it's a comfort thing. I challenge anyone to try walking 3 miles in a wetsuit and walk 3 miles in waders and come back and tell me which one you'd rather do it in. The only thing about the wetsuit is that some nights it is hot. I have a couple different thicknesses of wetsuits. I have a 3.2 and a 4.5. The 4.5 I use in the fall, 3.2 I use in the summer. That's referring to the millimeter and the thickness. Usually they're thicker around the core in your chest and a little thinner on your arms. So let's see, the flush is a nice feature. Some guys pee in their wetsuits, I'll be honest. I do it, but it's you can flush yourself out, and it's also a way to cool down if you're hot. You can't really flush yourself in a pair of waders. And again, a pair of spandex bike shorts underneath your wetsuit is your best friend. Moving on. So early season, so I start my season like most of you guys. I'm chomping at the bit, usually end of April, early May. I'm out there poking around on the marshes trying to find the first schoolies of the season. I focus on estuaries. I look for areas that I think that water is going to warm up the quickest, the soonest. So Joppa Flats, anywhere upriver on the Parker, backside of Cranes, that whole area. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Candy House area over on the way to Gloucester. That's a great early season spot. Basically what I'm looking for is, as you guys know, these mud flats, those heat up first in the spring. So during the course of the day, you get the tide goes up, goes onto the flats, warms up. Then once that tide flips, you get that warm water outgoing. Typically that's what I'm targeting. I'm looking for outgoing tides after a nice warm sunny day. Things have had a chance to heat up. That time of year the water's cold, so I think the fish, when they show up, they're looking for that water, any water they can find that's kind of in their comfort zone. And sometimes just a few degrees of difference can mean mean finding fish or not finding fish. Usually, like I said, early May through June. I'm using small plugs, small soft plastics, small bucktail, sometimes a bucktail without even a pork teaser, just to keep that profile small. Jumping minnows, the junior smacket are great early season plugs. They're small profiles. SP minnows work all the time around here. But don't overlook the beaches either. A lot of guys get hung up on the marshes early season. The way I look at it is, okay, so those fish are coming in, they're entering the rivers. Well, they have to go by the beach to get to the river. So, don't overlook the beaches. I've caught fish on the beach at the beginning of May when, I've gone in the shop and Kay's told me I'm crazy for going down the beach. So, so don't overlook those either. But by the time the end of May rolls around and beginning of June, it's time to hit the beachfront. So last year, the June full moon went off around here, or at least where I was fishing it did. A lot of big fish. We start focusing on the big tidal flats that are around here, mainly over in Ipswich, down at Cranes. A lot of these areas, I'm also going to target areas that are adjacent to the river mouth. So anywhere near the mouth of either side of the mouth of the Merrimack, the beachfront by the shop there. That's a close proximity to the river, so you've got sand eels that are coming, around that corner from the jetty. Sometimes we get mackerel that have been coming in on the beach. I had a charter earlier this year where we were catching mackerel on SP minnows off the beach, so you never know. Some of the areas that we fish are only fishable on big moon tides. So we're looking at areas that, other than a 10.5 foot tide, are high and dry, or maybe not high and dry, but there might be a foot or two of water. So not really enough water to hold fish. But when we get those big tides, they fill in, and there are some spots that I fish, some troughs that they won't fill in with enough water until it's a really big tide. Again, wetsuits are an advantage. Lets us get out on the bar, lets us stay longer than most guys would if they had waders on. That being said, we have to be smart about it. We try and generally target outgoing tides if we can. If I'm targeting an incoming tide, I'm very sure that, of my route back to the main beach, how to get there, how much tide I can let come in before I can, not get back to the beach. So it just comes with spending time out there, knowing where you're going, and just being cognizant of that when you're out there. Yeah?
Just what would you say your average night is in hours?
In hours, it really depends. I mean, some nights, like, I'll go out and some nights I feel like I'm just grinding it out, like I'm out and I kind of make that decision early in the night. I'm like, I'm staying till 2 in the morning, whether I'm hitting fish within the first couple hours or not. It also depends on the tide. Like if I get out early and I'm saying, well, I'm going to go fish this whole tide, but I really have confidence in the top half. That's really what I'm looking forward to. Then yeah, I'm more apt to stick it out because in my mind I know, okay, well, the good tide, the good couple hours of the tide are still ahead of me. But there are also nights that I get out there and after an hour and a half, 2 hours, I haven't had a tap, I start to change my mind. I'm like, all right, I'm losing motivation quickly here. I start talking myself out of it, So it varies. It really varies. I guess the biggest variables would be if I'm seeing bait out there. If there's any, if I'm seeing bait, I'm going to stick around and hope that there's some fish are going to move in. But if I'm not seeing bait, I'm not getting any hits, no taps, I'm going to either move to a different spot or I'm going to consider calling it a night. So I would say my average trip, probably 3 hours of fishing, maybe 3 to 4 if it's good. So yeah, somewhere in there. Okay, so beachfront, we're moving out front. It's getting later in June. We're going to start using bigger plugs too. So I'm starting to pack my bag with bigger profile plugs, Mambo minnows, metal lip swimmers, Dannies. There's bigger bait around. There's mackerel. We've actually been catching fish with whiting in them this season. So whiting, I mean big whiting too, like 15, 16-inch whiting. So obviously those fish are feeding out further, they're feeding out deeper, but they're looking at big profile bait fish, and they're looking for a big snack. So I'm more than willing to throw a big snack to them. Just generally, I like dark colors at night, lighter colors during the day, but we'll kind of get into that. There are always exceptions to that. The moons being one of those exceptions to when I pick my colors. So keeps asking me to join the Wi-Fi. All right, so talking about moons. Full moons and new moons. So I fish a lot around the moons. Like when I start off my season, well, before the season even starts, I look at a calendar and I'm looking at when the moons are. So every month I have an idea of this year. We've kind of been in this pattern of the full moons are all towards the start of the month, and then the new moons are like a couple weeks later. So the June moon, we didn't really do anything around the June moon this year because everything was kind of a few weeks late. We didn't really get started. Fish didn't show up till late this year. So June moon was kind of a bust. Actually, to be honest with you, all of the full moons this year, with the exception of the July full moon, have been kind of a bust. We haven't gotten any cloud cover, hardly, for any of the full moons that we've had this year. So they've all been super bright. With the exception of the July moon, I really haven't caught many fish around the full moons this year. The new moons, on the other hand, I've caught a lot of big fish this year around the new moon. So the full moon, as you know, obviously it's full. We have really bright. We get really big tides with the full moon. But we'll kind of get into a little more in depth on each of those. But again, just remember that the full moons are big tides, bright nights. New moons, smaller tides, but moonless, dark nights, which are, if you're surf casting for big striped bass, you want a nice dark night. So again, anytime we have a full moon, I'm crossing my fingers that we're going to get cloud cover, or even a little bit of rain. Typically, with full moons, I'm targeting the top half of the incoming. So I kind of talked about spots that maybe aren't fishable except for the highest of water. So that's kind of why I'm looking at the top half of the tide. Light-colored lures. So this past July, we got into a good bite of fish on chicken scratch plugs. Didn't matter what the plug was, they just wanted chicken scratch. SP minnows, Mambo minnows, North Barb, bottle darters. They wouldn't touch a purple one, they wouldn't touch a natural colored one, but that chicken scratch, they just wanted that chicken scratch. I don't know what it is about the chicken scratch, but so when that moon is really bright, obviously the traditional conventional thinking is, you want your dark colored plugs at night, your lighter ones during the day. Well, the lighter colored ones during the full moon, I think, are probably more effective than the dark colored ones. So definitely next time you got a full moon, give that a shot. Another thing that someone was telling me about, and I kind of forgot to put it on here on the slides, it kind of regards eels. So as a lot of you guys know, when you get eels, when you keep them in a tank, if you don't have a dark colored tank, they will lighten up. So if you put them in like a white 5-gallon bucket for a couple days, those eels are going to turn a really light color. Typically, I have a black tank at home with an aerator, so I throw all my eels in there. I like to keep them dark because I'm fishing at night. But around the full moon, I was talking to a gentleman who intentionally takes his eels a couple days before the full moon, throws them in a white bucket, and lets them really lighten up in the color. So that way he's throwing live eels, but they're very light colored live eels. So I've yet to try it, but in theory, I don't see why it necessarily wouldn't work. I think that the big tides tend to bring fish in. I feel like generally incoming tides, especially when you're fishing a large open flat beach especially a beach where maybe you're fishing troughs and holes, like any sort of area where a fish can get stuck in one of those troughs. So I think fish have an innate sense that, okay, the tide has flipped. I know that I need to get out of this area or I may end up high and dry in here. So I think fish just have this sense that when the tide's going in, they feel more comfortable going into these troughs, they feel more comfortable in these holes, but once they sense that that tide is flipped, they know it's time to get out of there and get out of these shallow areas and retreat into some deeper, safer water. So just a theory. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but it seems to line up with, I tend to target incoming tides. Not that I don't catch fish on outgoing tides, there are spots and times that I do fish, but for the most part, if you were to say, are you an incoming guy or an outgoing guy, I prefer the incoming. One bad thing about big tides, aside from that bright moon, is that they pick up a ton of stuff from the marshes. So when we get these big tides, all the grass and debris and weeds that are upriver in the marsh, and all that stuff gets flushed out front. Comes down the river, and depending on which way the wind's blowing, it might end up on the beach. So that's a consideration. Doesn't always happen, but it can be annoying when it happens because sometimes it can ruin that full moon bite. So the new moon, on the other hand, very dark. There's no moon in the sky, hardly at all. Either side of it, it's usually just a sliver. Right now, we're just a couple days off the new moon. I believe the new moon was on Sunday.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this past weekend, Saturday night, I got into two fish that were probably around 35 pounds and a few other that were just around keeper size. So, yeah, I really have been doing well around the new moons this year. They're smaller tides. Right now, I think we've got like a 9. I don't know. It's not a big tide right now. But I'm usually targeting different aspects of the tide. So on a new moon, I may be actually targeting the last few hours of the outgoing. Trying to get to some of those outer bars and maybe catch some of the last of the bait that's dumping out of the river and the fish that are coming in to intercept them. Right now, there's not a ton of fish running the rivers. Most of the fish are out front. Most of the bait, for the most part, the herring and stuff have all dumped out of the rivers. There's still some sand eels pushing in and out of the rivers with the tides, but most of the bait is out front right now. So although, especially this time of year in the fall, we start to get towards really strong tides, the Earth's axis is kind of tilting and the water starts shooting out of here at about 1,000 miles an hour. So be careful in the fall if you're wading because the currents change in September and October and they get a lot stronger. Dark colored plugs, this time, like this past week, I got nothing but dark colored plugs in my bag. If I'm not fishing eels, I'm fishing blurple, so I'm fishing something dark like this, black over purple. Weeds in the water, less of an issue. It's not as big a tide, so you're not getting the marshes flooded. And actually the new moons are not bad for early season fishing up in the back marshes, again, because it doesn't flood the marshes over. And typically, I feel like fish are much more active around the moons, especially the new one. So, fishing the island. Specifically, we'll talk about, kind of broke it down into like the north end and the south end. So the north end of the island, for the sake of this discussion, we'll call that the mouth of the Merrimack to the beginning of the refuge. It's a steep beach, very steep, drops off quickly. You can't really wade too far out most of there. The last few years, I mean, with the exception of the bar, you know, to the left of the shop that you've got down there on the point, there's not a lot of standout structure. I mean, you've got your jetties down to the right, but unlike some of the beaches down in Ipswich and other spots that have massive bars that go, you know, 3/4 of a mile out, you don't have as much prominent structure. The structure that's at the island is very subtle. So, again, I mentioned the bar that's halfway to the, it's over to the left there. One thing that I've been talking with some guys about is that the fishing really, I mean, you guys probably know off the beachfront, the last couple of years just really hasn't been what it's been. It's really been slower. Way out front, we've got, you know, that big bar that's out, I don't know, maybe 1/4 mile off. A lot of guys tend to think that that's really changed the way and where the fish come in. A lot of guys think that those fish don't, a lot of those fish are tend to run that outer bar and never make it in towards the beach. I mean, obviously we do get fish that come in towards the beach, but the last couple of years, especially by the shop and by the jetties, the fishing really hasn't been what it used to be. So is that outer bar keeping some of the fish, you know, in from the beach? I don't know. But that outer bar that's way out there now is a lot bigger than it used to be in years past. Obviously, you know, things change and we go through cycles, so hopefully that'll maybe change around. But it's been tough fishing for me down the island this year, with the exception of a few good nights down the south end. A lot of my fishing's been done over in Ipswich, so. That's my dog, Cobb. I take him fishing sometimes in the spring when you're still allowed to have dogs on the beach. So heading south towards Refuge, you have the jetties. So the jetties are one of the few, you know, structure and current breaks that occur that way. I like to fish around the jetties. I like to fish either side. I used to kind of venture out on them. I had one close call a few years ago where I was taken out by a wave that I stupidly got my lure stuck down on one of the rocks, and I climbed down to try and unhook it from the rock, and when I looked up I had a wave hit me in the face. So I don't really go out on the jetties as much as I used to, but they definitely provide a current and just some sort of safe haven for bait fish. So definitely if you're walking the beach, definitely give the jetties a shot, either side. If you're feeling adventurous, you know, just be careful going out on those. They're super slippery. Wear corkers if you have them. The predominant baits that we see out on the beach here, sand eels, mackerel. We had peanut bunker last year. I don't know if any of you guys ran into any of those, but we had a couple of days in the fall where we had peanut bunker here, which I haven't seen too often around here. As far as what I use when I'm walking the beach out here, typically my bag, I've got bucktails, tins, deadly dicks. Get a lot rougher water here, so typically I want something a little heavier that's going to track through those waves a little better. I find that lighter plastic plugs, like if we get any kind of surf, like mambo minnows for example, these get tossed all over the place in the surf. So these aren't that great for rough surf that tends to occur more often down here as opposed to other places. Okay. So moving south a little bit, again, get down into the refuge. It's very similar until you get down, man, I've walked most of it this year. South of 3, things start to flatten out a little bit. Again, there's not a ton of structure. You've got some points that kind of jut out, and you've got some bowls. But again, there's not these big outer bars that you can wade to. So the bait guys have been doing a lot better than me down there this year, the guys that are throwing worms. It's just, I think it's a lot more conducive to bait fishing down there as opposed to eeling and plugging. Not that you can't catch fish on eels and plugs, but it's not the best place to go if that's where you're looking. 6 and 7, however, once you get down to the end of the island, that's a whole different ball game. That's 6 and 7 are actually a lot more like cranes or other, you know, Steep Hill, for example. Once you get down to 6, you've got that big tidal flat down there. You can wade a couple hundred yards out. The fish tend to come up onto the flats and stay at tide. They'll kind of meander around and kind of drop into pockets, and whereas the rest of the beach, it's very fast moving water. The fish aren't staging or staying anywhere. They're always in transit going up and down the beach. So I find that the flats tend to hold fish for a little longer because it's, you know, it's easier for them to maintain sometimes on those. And plus the bait gets, the bait tends to gravitate towards the flats. So Emerson rocks tends to attract a lot of bait. You've got crabs, you've got lobsters, you've got all sorts of other things aside from mackerel and sand eels that big stripers eat. Big stripers will have no problem eating a lobster. Yeah.
Pick up any blues at night too?
I haven't. I've been wanting to get a bluefish really bad. I've been trying. One of the charter boat company that I worked for a few weeks ago, I mean, we had one Saturday where we must have caught 20 bluefish and not one of them was under 10 pounds. So I've been trying to go out and find them, but I've been unsuccessful thus far. I have heard of a few guys down the south end that have caught them. So I think it's just bluefish are just a matter of literally covering as much ground and making as many casts as you can. So, because you never know where they're going to be. The bass, I have a better idea of where they're going to be. Bluefish, who knows, you know? Yeah. So again, the rocks at Emerson, Sandy Point, those fish well at high water. Once the boulder field gets covered over, I've caught some nice fish in that boulder field on eels. It can be a little more challenging to fish the boulder field. That's a whole other ball game than fishing the open beach. But for the sake of tonight's discussion, we're just kind of going to stick to the sand and the beach. But yeah, the rocks in Sandy Point, I feel like those bring in a lot of bait fish. That's my mom, by the way. We brought her down to drive on last year, and that was the fish that she caught. So that about made her summer last year. So big bass, skinny water. It's probably a little tough to see, but this is a satellite image of, I won't say exactly where, but it's close to an area that I fish. So in a shot like this, I mean, you've got your beach. The beach proper is way up there. So, you know, the beach that you'd be walking along would be up there. This is probably, I don't know, half a mile off the beach. So, you know, we'll wade out these outer bars on a dropping tide. And, you know, you can see in an area like this, you've got all these transit routes for fish to travel. You've got current breaks by these bars. So, I mean, this is just fish heaven in here for stripers. You know, in the wintertime, like, I love looking at Google Earth and looking for stuff like this. Granted, it's not going to be like that when you go. I mean, because these sands are shifting constantly. So what you see on Google Earth is not what you're going to necessarily get when you go there, but it gives you an idea of areas that you can look at and go, okay, this is a big tidal flat, and I can go check this out at low tide during the day. Definitely check out areas that you're unfamiliar with during the day if you can. It's really tough to go to a place for the first time at night and have any sort of confidence in where you're heading, where you should be fishing. I strongly suggest doing it in a wetsuit or wet wading. You can do it in waders, but you've just got to be so cognizant of where the tide is, where you are, how much water is between you and the beach. So it's just, I felt like I was looking over my shoulder all the time when I was in my waders, and I don't get that feeling in my wetsuit. By skinny water, I'm talking about 3 to 6 feet of water, maybe less. These fish are getting an extremely, extremely good look at what you're throwing at them. We're not talking about fishing 20, 30 feet of water where that fish is looking at your plug way up there and coming up from the depths and going to whack it. I mean, this fish is literally watching your plug go right by, and he's getting a really good look at it. So your presentation's got to be dead on. Yeah, you really got to fool the fish. Again, let's see. As far as weather goes, we'll get into a little more in depth as far as weather, but I find that the shallow beaches don't fish that well in rough conditions. Out here, you know, the island, I'll fish that for a hurricane. It's deeper water. Fish have, you know, more water to retreat down into. on a beach like this where it's 3 to 6 feet deep, when you get a storm coming in, I mean, the whole water column is getting pushed and moved. So I think it's really tough for fish to hold in any sort of shallow water. So I tend to shy away from the shallow beaches when it's really rough. Not that I don't want to fish. I do want to fish when it's rough and stormy, but I just have to pick a different location. So. Let's see. Did I have? Okay. Picture on the top there. I mean, that gives you an idea of a tidal flat. That's at low tide, so all the sand you see there at high tide is going to be covered by 3 to 4 feet of water. You can kind of see you got a trough coming through, right there. You got another trough coming through right there. So those are going to be, we call them kind of like fish highways at high tide. The fish tend to travel along those troughs. They use them as ambush points. As you know, striped bass are ambush predators, primarily if they can be. So if they can sit down in a hole and hide and wait for sand eels to come up over them, that's their favorite way to eat. Again, fishing these areas are wind and weather dependent. If it's blowing hard east or northeast, I'm probably going to rethink going somewhere like Cranes. I'm really looking for like a west-southwest wind over my shoulder. It also keeps the surf calm, which is helpful for eeling. Eeling can be tough doing it in rough water. And again, because it's so shallow, the water gets dirty quickly. So if you're fishing in a spot that's a little deeper, you might be able to buy yourself a little more time as far as that water clarity and it not being too dirty to fish. Okay. So plugs. So here's a quick rundown of what I pack in my bag.
Maybe you want more light?
No, I think we're okay. Can you guys see these? Yeah. So aside from eeling, I would say that this little guy right here, the Mambo minnow, has probably caught me the most fish aside from eels the last few seasons. Specifically, I mean, it's a plastic swimming plug. There's really nothing too special about it. It's kind of like a big SP minnow. Slightly larger profile. Runs shallower than an SP. This runs about a foot or two under the water. I like to put a Siwash dressed hook on the back. A couple of reasons. It is a little easier to unhook fish. It's one less trouble to deal with. And the dressed hook, I feel like you can actually slow the retrieve of this down, and you still get that nice slow side-to-side wobble. So yeah, the Siwash hook, I definitely recommend swapping that second hook out. Everyone knows the SP minnow. People catch a ton of fish on those around here. The old go-to. You want to make sure you're swapping your hooks out on these. Stock hooks are junk on these. I mean, I've had plenty of fish, 10, 15 pounds bend hooks on it. So definitely change, and the split rings. The split rings are junk on them too. So change your hooks and split rings on your SP minnows, or you may regret it. You may end up with a heartbroken bent hook. North Bar Bottle Darter has won itself a place in my bag this year. These cast a mile. They have an action that's similar to this. They dig a little more. I mean, obviously, you're dealing with a totally different lip. But you get that similar wobble, wide wobble. These cast weight. The only drawback to the Mambo minnow is these cast like a wet plastic bag. They're terrible. So these cast a lot further. If you work it slow, you can work it pretty close to the surface. The faster you retrieve this, the deeper it's going to dig. So keep that in mind. These are great for rough water. These will hold their track way better than a Mambo minnow, probably better than an SP minnow. Bottle plugs were designed to fish in rough water. So Mica sand eel. I haven't been using this lure as much the last few years because haven't been fishing during the daylight hours as much, but I used to do a lot of sunrise, first light, early morning, and this is a killer first light lure, especially over in Ipswich, front and back. Yeah, this thing is killer. It's just essentially a floating needlefish, and yeah, I mean, this is actually one of the few lures that I'll get into the retrieves, but I actually work the Mica with a sidearm retrieve. Most of the time I'm retrieving with a rod tip up, but the Mica I'll actually retrieve that with a sidearm retrieve. The reason being is that when you work it with a sidearm retrieve, it does this thing where it kind of dips under just a little bit. So you can work it two different ways. If you work it with a high rod tip, it'll kind of meander back and forth like a pencil popper, but if you work it with a sidearm retrieve, you'll get it to kind of dip and just dip under the water a little bit, and something about that Mica just drives fish nuts. It's a great topwater lure. You'll get the fish, explode on it. Great lure. Tins, Deadly Dicks. I usually use Deadly Dicks, Castmasters. Yeah.
Question, between the Nickel Dean and the Ocean Lures,
Yeah.
which one do you prefer?
Well, the Ocean Lure is literally a knockoff of the Mica Dean. They're both basically the same thing.
And then the Nickel Dean had two versions. They had the larger diameter to begin with.
Yeah, they made a. I have at home one of the bigger ones, but yeah, he had like two different.
Which one do you?
This is, I believe, the smaller profile one. I have the bigger one. I've probably got more on the smaller one, I'd say. Yeah, tins in the spring and especially in the fall when we get rough weather, big surf, I really like to use tins. Castmasters and Deadly Dicks are pretty much my go-to. My first 40-inch fish I ever caught was on a Deadly Dick down at Lot 6 the day before a hurricane. So.
What's the retrieve on that, and what part of the waterfall?
Varies. Depends on how fast you work it is gonna determine where it goes. So sometimes I'll mix it up. So I'll make a couple casts and I'll let it sink all the way to the bottom for a few seconds, and then I'll pick it up and I'll work it with a slow retrieve. That way I'm pretty sure it's pretty close to the bottom. The nice thing about fishing the beaches out here is that you can let it hit the bottom and pick it up. You're not going to get snagged, so you can experiment with your retrieve, and if you hit the bottom, it's not like you're losing the lure every time. But anything, I mean, I've caught fish on a fast retrieve, I've caught fish just crawling it along the bottom, so it really varies. My biggest advice would be experiment, see what they want. Bucktails. Bucktails are great lures pretty much year-round around here. They're the universal lure. I mean, they don't look like much like right now, but when you put a pork teaser on there, you get that nice, fluttering tail, and it's just a great rough water lure. Biggest thing about bucktails is just, I find, keeping contact with it. Depending on how rough the conditions are, how deep the water is, you got to adjust your weight. So if it's really rough, you may want to be throwing a heavier one. Typically between 3/4 of an ounce and maybe 1.5 ounces is where I fish around here. If it's nice and calm and not too deep, I'm probably fishing a 3/4 ounce bucktail. If it's big and nasty out, I might be fishing 1.5 ounces. It all varies. So I have a bunch of sizes with me usually, and I'm just experimenting and trying to get it where in the water column the fish are. Soft plastics. I keep it pretty simple with soft plastics, just sluggos, single hook. I haven't been fishing sluggos that much either. I mean, it's just one of those things I keep in my bag as a what if, but I don't fish soft plastics too much, so I do keep them with me. Yeah, James.
With your sluggos, you don't fish two hooks?
I do have some bigger ones that are more like an eel. Yeah, those are tandem rigged. But like if I'm fishing a smaller one like this size, I'm just fishing a single hook.
Now, do you also weight them?
It varies. Like this hook has a weight like built into like right here. You can't see it because it's embedded in, but I guess it varies. Like I have a couple. I usually carry a few that are unweighted, and then I have a couple that are weighted depending on the conditions. But the ones like Surfland, for example, has got some of those nice, the Joppa eels. The ones that are tandem rigged, those are sweet. Those are good. If they're on an eel bite, they probably will hit one of those too. Pencil poppers, let's see. I usually carry a few topwater lures. I like the Yozori. They just started making the surface cruisers again. They stopped making them a few years ago. I get these entangled, but anyway. All right. The jumping minnow, you guys are probably familiar with. Great plug. This is a good early spring plug. Another plug that you should probably replace the hooks on. This has an awesome walk the dog action. Arguably the best walk the dog out there. It's kind of like a spook. It's not really a pencil popper. It really zigs and zags. Let's see. Gibbs needle. I really like the Gibbs needles. I believe this is like a medium sinker. It's not, it doesn't sink too fast, but this runs about middle of the water column. Cast like a bullet. This is a great, if you're fishing rough water. This is a great nighttime lure. Again, darker colors at night, lighter colors. I generally don't fish needlefish during the day. Most guys don't fish needlefish during the day. Not that you can't catch fish on it, but it's generally a nighttime plug. And then finally, metal lip swimmers. If there's big bait around, I'm definitely going for a metal lip. The strikes on a metal lip are some of my favorite. I just feel like when fish hit metal lips, they just hammer them. And also, you're just working it so slow. Both needlefish and metal lips are some of the most intense hits that you're going to get from a striper. So yeah, that's generally what's in my bag at any given time. There may be more or less of a particular one depending on where I'm fishing, but that's just a brief rundown of what's in my bag, not even including eels. That's a whole nother slide. So retrieves and techniques. Like most people, I cast with a solid overhead. I'm not going to do that, but generally when you go to cast, you want to have hand on the butt of your rod, another hand here. 90% of the time when I am retrieving a lure or an eel, I'm retrieving it right just like this, especially eels. A few different reasons. I mean, if I'm fishing a plug, sometimes I'll have that rod tip down just a little more. The reason being, with a plug, you want to be able to set that hook pretty quick. So you want to have room to come back with it. On the other hand, if you're fishing an eel, you want to have that rod tip way up because you're going to actually do the opposite when you get that bump, that rod tip's going to go down. So this is kind of like the ready position, like baseball or sports, just, you're ready for that hit. In some windy and rough conditions, I'll use a modified sidearm retrieve or even a modified sidearm cast. A lot of times, the biggest thing, like when you have a really windy day, especially if you get, a left to right wind, so like a north or a south wind, the biggest thing that happens is when you give that big overhead cast, is it goes way up in the air and then that wind hits it and it just blows it like that. Your line ends up way over there or ends up way over there. Well, if you can kind of work on a bit of a sidearm cast and keep it as low down to the water as you can, you kind of want to be like throwing a line drive if you can. I find that kind of a modified cast keeps it up and out of the wind and it helps eliminate a little bit of that bow. Also, when you're retrieving, you know, on a really windy day, if it's going, you know, this way on you, if you're retrieving, you know, you're retrieving like this, your line has got a big bow in it like that as well. So on a really windy day, I'm usually fishing with my rod tip down towards the water. I want to keep my line out of the wind as much as possible. Sometimes I'll just have my rod tip in the water, so I'm just keeping direct contact with it. Again, the biggest thing anytime you're fishing a plug or an eel is you want to have contact with that lure or that bait, because you want to be able to feel when that fish hits. If you've got slack in your line and a fish picks up your eel, you're not even going to know it until he either spits it out or he swims off and he's gut hooked. So you don't want that. Again, certain lures dictate, you know, what I'm going to use for a retrieve. So if I'm using a Mikadine, or if I'm using a lure that doesn't cast that well and I'm trying to keep it out of the wind, I'm probably going to use, that's going to dictate what kind of a cast or what kind of retrieve I'm using. Again, keep contact with your lure, with your eel. Slowing things down at night. So a big thing, one of the biggest I get the most questions on is just how do you retrieve stuff? Like how fast are you working it? So when I'm fishing at night, say I'm fishing a mambo minnow, if I'm fishing in calm water, I'm retrieving it something like this. Maybe even a little slower. Now there are some nights where they, you know, want it a little faster. It's all about experimenting, but for the most part, it's, you know, if you're fishing at night, it's just slow, slow, and steady. Sometimes you got to slow it down. Sometimes it's like, you know, you're falling asleep out there. It's just such a slow, painful retrieve. But some nights that's what they want. Not always. So one thing about fishing is I'm constantly finding is just when I think I have it figured out, and I'm like, all right, this is, they want it like this. They surprise me, and that's not what they want. So there are always exceptions to it.
So when you're fishing the mambo,
Yep.
it's kind of slack tide, and so if you're fishing it real slow like they say you're supposed to, it's going to be on the surface.
Yep.
With a V. Is that a good thing?
Yeah. A lot of times with the mambo, you will hear that fish crash your lure. It's like a topwater hit. It's like they're hitting a pencil popper at night. So yeah, there's a lot of times that if you're retrieving that mambo painfully, and actually, you know what some guys do with mambos and with red fins, they actually bust that lip right off, and they'll just retrieve it, and that really makes it ride right up on the surface. So I haven't tried that yet, but I do know some guys bust the lip right off. But yeah, if you're working a red fin or a mambo real slow, it's literally right there on the top. Okay. So eels. Eels, eels, eels. If you want to catch big fish, you've got to fish with eels. Not that you can't catch fish with plugs. You will, you'll catch fish with plugs. You'll eventually catch big fish with plugs. But if you want to shorten that process, if you really want to go put a 20, 30, 40-pound fish on the beach, you need to get comfortable fishing with eels. Especially during the heat of the summer. Around here, July and August this year, if you weren't fishing eels at night, I don't know what you were catching. Maybe you were catching, but almost all my fishing is with eels, especially during the hot months of the summer. I get my eels, so for example, I'll go over to Surfland, I'll get my eels. I try and get my eels home as quick as possible. One thing with transporting eels, if you've got a bucket or something, get a bucket with a lid and holes in that, or just drill holes in the bottom of your bucket. Don't leave your eels in a bucket with their own slime, because they will suffocate. A lot of you guys probably know this, but if you're not familiar with fishing with eels, you have to keep draining off that slime. Or you need to keep them in water with an aerator. If you keep them in just a 5-gallon bucket, eventually that oxygen in there is going to run out and they're going to die. They will change color, as I mentioned, depending on the color of the tank you put them in. So if you put them in a white bucket, they're going to turn light. If you keep them in a dark bucket, they're going to darken up. I haven't. Maybe they turn yellow if you put them in a yellow bucket. I have no idea. Yeah, Larry.
When you go for a typical evening of 2 or 3 hours,
Yep.
how many eels will you take with you?
It depends on how confident I am. Some nights I don't know what to expect, so I'll just throw a few eels in, 3 or 4 eels, and I got a bunch of plugs with me, so I'm ready for whatever. But you know, if I'm serious, if I'm like, all right, it's new moon, I'm going out, we're getting big fish tonight, I may have 10 to a dozen eels on me. So yeah. If it's hot and heavy, I mean, you may lose an eel every fish you get. So if you get, you know, 8 or 10 fish a night, you're going through 8 or 10 eels. That's a good night. It's not always that good.
So how do you set your eel up? You knock them out? You do anything to them?
Depends. So if I want to fish live, I have another slide about fishing specifically dead eels. But when I'm fishing, if I want to fish live ones, like really lively eels, the way I transport them is I have a bag on my belt. It's just similar to this material. It's just a square bag. So I'll actually take a mesh shell bag, I'll dump my eels in that, and then my eels go inside my eel pouch. When I need to get an eel on my hook, I just pull my pouch out. I have a rag, I reach in, I grab an eel, pull it out, pop it on the hook. Eels go back in my pouch on my side, and then I'm ready to fish. So I can do all of that out in the surf without having to go back to the beach and, you know, put my stuff down, put an eel on the sand, and you know, so it is possible to do it without doing all that. It takes some practice, but so yeah, if you want to keep them lively, you got to keep them in an aerator. I have a tank set up at home with a little aerator that I bought from a pet store, and they'll keep for weeks that way. So I typically try and keep a little stockpile at the house.
You keep them in salt water?
Freshwater, they're fine. They actually eels travel from the ocean into freshwater to spawn and do their thing, and then they travel back out to the ocean. So they do just fine in freshwater. 5/0 or 6/0, I use Gamakatsu octopus hooks. I like the 4X ones. There's two different, the stronger ones. There's 4X and then there's the regular ones. Get the stronger ones. Especially if you're fishing with eels, you're fishing for big fish. You really want your gear to be up to task to handle a big fish. 40 to 50 pound fluoro leader attached to a swivel. You can, some nights I'll tie direct to the hook just with the fluoro. I also, if I know that I'm going to be switching back and forth from plugs to eels, you can put a hook right on that tactical or angular clip. Fish don't mind. I've caught plenty of fish eeling with a tactical or angular clip and then a hook. So don't let that deter you. It doesn't seem to deter the bass. Yeah, go ahead.
Now hooking these,
Yes.
I do it better, you know, through the bottom.
I typically grab an eel, grab them right, you know, by the head, behind the head, and yeah, right through the bottom jaw, and I try and go out one of the eyes if I can. But yeah, they will when you hook them. So when you hook them, if they're really lively, they're going to flip out. First thing they're going to do, a lot of times, is they're going to try and ball right up around your hook. What I'll do is when I get an eel, you know, I'll be hooking them up, and then I'll drop them, and then I'll just bounce them a few times and just try and keep, you know, keep him straightened out. You don't want to let them, you don't want to leave them to their own devices because they will wrap themselves around your leader and their hook. They'll weasel their way off your hook. They're like little Houdinis. They're amazing sometimes. So one of the things I wanted to mention was fishing live eels. There are certain situations where I prefer live eels over dead eels and vice versa. Where I prefer live eels is fishing strong moving current. What I like to do with a live eel is almost like a dead drift. So what you're doing is you're kind of just keeping contact with that eel, and you're letting him kind of swim and move with the current. So if you've got, left to right or right to left, you're typically casting kind of up the current where it's moving, and then I'm just literally just barely just keeping contact so I can just feel him, swimming just ever so slightly against my line. So that's one way to fish it. You're covering a lot of water from one way to another. You kind of let it get to the end of that drift, and then you kind of pick it up and you reset it. So in that sense, you're just casting the eel and letting him do his own thing. You're letting him determine the presentation. He's swimming. Most eels are just going to head towards the bottom. That's what they do. So if I'm fishing an area where the water's moving fast, I'm probably going to reach, if I have a live one, I'm going to probably go with a live one, because it's really hard to move a dead eel through fast water and have it look the way you want it to. So on the other hand, I really enjoy fishing, or I've had a ton of luck fishing dead eels. Actually, just this past weekend, both of my big fish came on dead eels. They were long dead, there's no life in them, and I was just retrieving it myself. So there's a couple of reasons I enjoy fishing dead eels. For one, you get to control the retrieve. So when you're fishing like a live eel, I don't know if you've ever fished a live eel and you cast them out and you retrieve them in. When you're pulling that eel back in, if you're reeling him in, he's constantly like fighting back against you. He's wiggling the whole time. And to a fish, he's getting pulled through the water and he's fighting against you, it doesn't look very natural. What you really want to do with a livey is you just want to let him do his thing. You want to let him swim, let him go where he's going to go. You want to keep contact with him and keep him out of trouble. You don't want to let him get down in the structure and stuff, but you want to, for the most part, let him swim the way he's going to swim. With a dead eel, when you're retrieving it, he's not fighting back against you, so he's just kind of slinking through the water, and that tail just kind of flutters back and forth. So I work a dead eel kind of like I'd work a sluggo. It's just a big natural sluggo, if you will. I use a pretty moderate retrieve, faster than you would probably use on normal eeling. Like this past weekend, when I was reeling in a dead eel and fish were whacking it, I was probably reeling at something like this, which is a pretty fast retrieve for an eel. And what they were doing is just that. I'm using a high rod tip, and I'm just waiting, and I'm feeling for that tap tap. And sure enough, they would whack it, and you drop your rod tip. I typically try and, so there's no hard and fast rules. No, they're not always going to hit it the same way. So I've had some fish hit an eel, and it damn near pulls the rod out of my hand. And I've had other ones where it's like they tap, and as soon as they feel that little bit of tension, they drop the eel. So it really varies. There are some times that, I've had to drop the rod tip, and as I drop the rod tip, he's still pulling, and all I have to do is just pull back and set the hook. He does all the work. And then there's other times that I drop the rod tip, and I wait a couple seconds, and then I go to pull, and there's nothing there. So it varies. You're gonna miss fish. It just happens. It's part of the cost of doing business. You're gonna miss fish. It's part of the learning curve. I miss plenty of fish. I still miss fish. Everyone misses fish.
So you're just reeling fast, you're not doing nothing with the tip?
No, I'm not really jigging. I guess in a sluggo, I'm not moving it like that. Just a slow, steady retrieve, and I'm just waiting to feel. You really want to, you got to just be focused, because as soon as you feel that tap, you have to drop that rod tip immediately, because as soon as they feel that tension, if they feel something pulling back, they're going to drop that eel. I think it triggers a reaction bite. The faster you move it, obviously not too fast, but it moving through the water at a good pace, it allows, it forces that fish to make a decision. Am I doing okay on time? Am I going too long? Or? Okay.
Question?
Yep.
Dead eel.
Yeah.
You always want to use the fresh one that just died that night? Or
Those are ideal.
Usually useless You use something that's been in the freezer for 2 months.
I'll use both. Ideally, if I have a fresh one, that's what I'm gonna reach for. But when I'm running low on eels, I do stick them in the freezer and reuse them. So absolutely, thawed eels work just fine. So when you're looking at a beach, this is actually a couple years ago out front of the shop when we had that. Well, the bar was a lot different, a lot bigger a few years ago. So reading the waves and where they break is important. If I'm looking for an area to fish, if I'm looking for deep water, I'm not looking for an area where I see waves breaking a ways offshore. To me, that says that you've got shallow water all through that midsection there. You know, Plum Island, if you look at the beaches at Plum Island, all those waves break right up on the beach. It's because it drops off like that. So when you're looking at an area, you can tell a lot by where the waves are breaking, or you can tell a lot about the bottom by where the waves are breaking. The angle of the beach is going to tell you a lot about whether you've got deeper water out there or whether it's shallower for a ways. The waves are also going to give away sandbars. So sandbars that are out offshore, the waves are going to give away where those bars are. So you want to be targeting, hopefully if you have outer bars, you know, the fish are going to hopefully stage, you know, on either side of it and use those as an ambush point. So being able to find out where those bars are is definitely a huge advantage. Lines, seams, you know, just current lines, rips, any sort of, anything that stands out when I'm walking a beach is something that's worth at least giving a couple casts towards. Because, you know, Plum Island is so, I don't want to say featureless, but it's, you know, you have long stretches where it's just a very similar beach and there's really not much structure or, so anytime you can find any sort of little nuance or difference, that might hold fish. So, so what am I looking for when I go out? Typically when I'm walking to a spot, along the way I'm kind of occasionally just flicking my light on in the water and looking to see bait, if there's bait. Silver sides, when you flick your light on at night, will jump everywhere. They react to the light, so they're usually a dead giveaway. If I'm seeing bait, you know, that's a good thing. If I'm fishing with eels, I'm not as concerned if there's bait because honestly the bait isn't a factor of whether a fish is going to hit. The fish is going to hit that eel whether there's bait or not. Let's put it that way. So I'm more concerned with are there fish there if I'm fishing with eels. Is there some sort of structure? I'm looking for some sort of structure. I'm looking for an outer bar. I'm looking for a trough. I'm looking for just some sort of structure. I don't want to go and fish just an empty, featureless beach. You hardly ever find me fishing, you know, a relatively featureless stretch of beach. I'm always looking for something, whether it's a point, whether it's a cove, whether it's a hole, anything. Bass are ambush predators. They're looking for a point to jump out and ambush that bait, or a staging area. A lot of times bass too are just looking to get out of the current. They'll just get down and just stage, you know, on the lee side of a sandbar. It's a current break for them. It's a chance for them to rest for a little bit. I'm looking for deep enough water that's going to hold fish. I don't want to fish in a foot or two of water unless I'm, for some reason, convinced that there's fish in there. But anything, you know, 3 to 6 or more feet deep has the potential to hold fish. So I'm looking for moving water. I don't want rippingly fast water because stripers don't want to sit and hold in that. But I do want some water movement. I tend to steer away from slack tides. I feel like the fish really slow down during slack tides. It's just kind of a non-feeding time for them. Just trying to quickly get through this, sorry. Wind and weather are going to dictate where I go. My favorite wind would be west, southwest, over the back. Helps with casting, keeps the surf down. East and northeast, I know some guys love the east wind around here. I've never had great luck on a hard east or a northeast wind. I hate north winds. I almost won't go if it's blowing north hard. Ideally, I'd like an overcast day with a nice west, southwest. I don't like fishing bright sun, especially during the middle of the summer. I just think that if you're gonna devote time to fishing, there's way better times to devote. Although, if you're just going down to the beach for the day to spend some time, drink a few beers, then why not put a line up there? Rainy days. A lot of guys steer clear of rainy days, but I've had some great fishing days on overcast rainy days. If I am fishing in east wind, I'm packing heavy stuff in my bag: long casting lures, needles, tins, bucktails, bottle plugs. West wind, I can be a little more liberal with what I'm packing. I can throw mambo minnows because I know that I got the wind at my back and that's going to help me throw that. Soft plastics, anything. Eels don't cast too great, but with a wind at your back, you can really whale an eel out there. Pressure fronts, watch the weather. If you see a low pressure front coming in, that's a good time to fish. Especially if we've had a high pressure sitting on us for a while. When that weather shifts and we get that low pressure front pushes through, I have crushed some fish around some low pressure fronts. Lead ups to hurricanes, the day or two before can be really good. Again, ideally high pressure that we've had for a few days with a low pressure front coming in, it just gets them stirred up. Trip planning. Again, I typically target a 3, maybe 4 hour window. I'm looking at what the conditions are. I'm checking the wind. I'm checking the weather. Am I fishing day or night? Usually night. What's the moon phase? Has there been bait around? Do I have a network of people that I keep in contact with. So I get reports from here and there, and I usually have a good idea of what's going on in the general area, so I have an idea of what we're seeing for bait. Am I going to be fishing eels or plugs? That's going to kind of dictate where I'm going. Is the structure of the spot tide dependent? So is it a spot that only fishes well at high tide? Is it a spot that only fishes well, or maybe you can only get to in the last couple hours of the drop? So that depends. So basically, when I'm planning a trip, or I'm looking at what time do I want to be at the spot and fishing, and then I start to backtrack from there. So if I know that it's going to take me 45 minutes to walk there, 15 minutes to gear up, I'm just backtracking, from there. What time do I want to leave? And then that'll dictate what time I get to the spot and what tide I'm fishing. Physical fitness. If you want to fish where I fish, you are going to be walking 6 to 7 miles a night, round trip, over sand. So it takes a lot out of you. Being in good shape allows me to go and do that 4 and 5 nights a week. I'm not talking about going out and signing up for CrossFit. I'm talking about starting early in the spring when the snow melts, getting out and walking a mile or 2 a couple times a week, getting those legs under you, so that when you go to do it, you're not, sore for 3 days afterwards. And it's like, I'm also a landscaper, so I'm a very physically active guy. So I fish all night, work during the day. I try and sleep when I can, but being in decent shape allows me to get out there and do it 3 and 4 nights a week. So again, it's just a consideration. I look at my striper fishing as an athlete would almost prepare for a sporting season. Like, I want to be able to be out and fish as much as I can. So what do I need to do that? I need to be in good shape. I need to be not hungover every morning. Yeah, so you gotta, if you want to be serious about catching striped bass, you need to be serious with your approach, and that's how I look at it. almost there. Make your own luck. I'm fortunate to fish a lot. A lot of guys are like, oh, that guy's so lucky, blah, blah, blah. I really am a firm believer that you make your own luck. I target dates. I try and target dates and tides that I think are going to be most productive. I'm not just out there blindly putting in as many hours as I can. There is a method and a plan to most every time I go out. Again, half-assed efforts are going to get half-assed results. I'm not going to also waste too much time in an area, especially if I'm fishing with eels. A fish just simply isn't going to look at an eel 3 or 4 times, then on the 4th cast decide he's going to eat it. If an area is not producing, I'm moving around and trying different areas. I feel like guys get stuck and they just, I got to work this one area, and you hedge your bets, and if it produces, it does. If it doesn't, well, then you didn't try any other spots that particular evening. And yeah, again, it's doing what it takes. So, I mean, if that bite window, if those fish are hitting for the last 2 hours of the incoming tide, and that tide is at 2 a.m., I mean, do you want to go, how badly do you want to go catch that fish? Are you willing to give up sleep and leave the house at 1 in the morning and go home, you know, the next morning, eat breakfast, and then go to work after that? Like, it's a commitment. It's a huge commitment. I understand a lot of guys with families and stuff can't do that, but if you can put aside a few days a year, like as a vacation to do it, give it a shot. I mean, I know that a lot of guys can't do it. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I can do it. Yeah, that's what it takes to catch big fish sometimes. As far as guiding, I guide everyone from novice to experts, people that are looking to get into the sport, guys that have been doing it for a while, guys that are looking to learn a new area, or guys that are just looking to just learn the basics. Customer's experience level is going to dictate where and when we go. I'm probably not going to take a newbie wetsuiting down to Cranes. That's going to be a bad night for them. It's going to be a bad night for me. I try and be as upfront as I can, realistic with setting expectations for people. You know, fishing's been slow. I'm going to be brutally honest with them. I'm also going to be honest with them as far as how much work it's going to take to go where we're going to go. And, you know, a lot of times when they kind of hear about what's involved, they're like, all right, maybe we'll dial it back a little bit and try something different. I provide extra equipment. I have rods, reels. Customers can bring their own if they want. Catching fish is the goal, but teaching customers where and why we're going and how to do it is my primary goal. So providing them with a learning experience is my primary goal. If we catch fish, that's...
Fly fishing?
I fly fish a little bit in my spare time, but as far as guiding, I haven't been taking anyone guiding fly. I'm not nearly as experienced enough to be taking any customers fly fishing. So, but I would like to get into some more of that. Just a quick little video here. So this is a fish on an eel from last fall. So you'll kind of get to see the retrieve speed I'm using, and you'll actually get to watch me drop the rod tip, and you'll actually kind of see this fish really wasn't too hard because he literally pulled it almost all the way down. He wanted this eel, so you'll see here in a second. Here we go, and then there's the hook set.
Steve,
Yeah.
so you kept right on reeling and the tension on, you didn't let the bail and let them go?
Nope. With the Van Stall, I mean, your line or most reels when you're reeling, your bail is going to be flipped over, or if you don't have a bail, if you have a bailless, your line is going to be over the roller. So anytime you're fishing eels, yeah, you don't have the time to open the bail unless you're fishing a conventional, I guess. I suppose you could, have it in free spool mode and you could run off with it, but I don't fish with a conventional. So, but in my case, yeah, when you're retrieving it, it's all about just dropping that rod tip as quick as you can. Sometimes actually what I'll do too is I'll take a step forward if I can, that way you're giving him that little extra, because the idea is that you just don't want him to feel that tension, you know? You want him to pick that up and to just be as natural, have him feel as natural as he can. So yeah, I'll let that play out, and does anyone have any questions while that? Yeah.
What's your favorite color and what's your favorite plug?
As far as Mambo, I would say the Mambo. Last few seasons, this has been, and the majority of the time, because I'm fishing at night, I would say dark, so black or blurple.
Okay.
But the chicken scratch, the lighter colors have been good around the full moons. So.
Cool.
Yep.
Was someone else on the left?
Yeah, that's actually Andy Kelly over there. He had one on as well. We had a double header, so you'll see here in a second. I'm actually going to walk over to his fish and get both of them on there. There's Ed. Yeah. And there's that fish.
You're not saying where that is, you know?
I think you guys might know where.
I do.
A long, long ways. And there's Andy's fish. And this was last fall. It was about this time of year. In the evening, it was before the sun went down. So they'll certainly hit an eel during the daylight hours too.
Right then, do you remember?
I want to say incoming.
Yeah. Pretty full.
Yeah. So so that's it. Thank you guys.
Ah, excellent.
Day fishing.
Do you ever throw cut bait or plane?
I do, like, now I have a drive-on permit, so like when I go down for drive-on, I'll typically throw a couple, throw a worm rod out, and but most of the time, in the springtime, I would say, spring and the fall would be like the two times that I probably focus on daylight fishing. The water's cooler, the fish are more active during the day. When it comes midsummer, when it comes June, July, August, I'm like a vampire. Like, I don't even want to be out with a rod during the daylight hours. Like, so I would say it's probably like 70-30, like night to day.
And what time do you start fishing at night with eels?
Depends on the tide, but I like it to be dark. So if I'm, again, it depends on the tide. Like some nights, I may not be leaving the house until 10 or 11. Depending on when that tide is. Some nights I just want to get out at dark, so yeah. Anybody else? All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. 20-pounder. Yeah, Andy. Hold on, come towards me a little, Andy, if you can. Neither have I. Dude, Gabe. Nice. Dude, look at this. Go. Andy, I don't know what it is about me and you, but we seem to always hook up together. Oh yeah.
Show me. Hang on. Come on. I'm waiting for the camera. Hey, just give me a minute. Yeah, you ready?
Hold on, Andy, I'm coming over there with the GoPro.
Nice work, guys.
Look, we're gonna cheers these fish.
Yeah. How the fuck? You must have been looking at it. Well, I think when we went up in the air, it's not surprising it fell.
I think we got twins.
It is a little bigger.
It
Quite a bit.
bit.
Real big, though. I didn't have the set. Oh, yeah. Twins.
See, I told you guys I wasn't lying. Yep. And I still got my eel. Oh, yeah.
Make sure it's hooked up, eh?
Yeah, I'm gonna rehook them.